Hello everyone, how are you? Today I welcome you to the second chapter of What if Naruto were a Gremory demon in high school DXD? Remember, if you want more fics like that, just scroll down to the comments section and rate the fanfic from 1 to 10. Now then, enjoy.
Chapter 8, Boom. The dark crimson explosion spanned hundreds of thousands of kilometers, followed by a powerful shockwave that not only shook the foundations of the world, but also uprooted mountains and moved them away with such a powerful wind. Swoosh! A crimson blur streaked across the sky, traveling at breakneck speeds before crashing into a wall of ice, reducing it to tiny pieces of ice. His defense did little to stop him, and therefore he had to put his limbs in to cushion some of the damage, but that didn't happen, as he was many times faster and only hit his fist on his left cheek. His face turned completely around with a surprised look. Moments later he flew towards the ground as if he were a bullet, leaving rings of air before crashing to the ground with a small tremor. I did it! Naruto smiled as he stepped to the ground, his body covered in scratches that were healing at an incredible speed. Small fragments of ice protruded from some parts. The clothes were now just rags with too many holes and scratches. Slowly getting up, she winced at the burning sensation on her cheek. She couldn't block it much longer. She had the advantage of experience, but against his overwhelming strength and speed, it seemed to have little effect on the battle. And besides, it wasn't a fight to the death, just a little training exercise. This will leave a mark, Graphia thought, stroking her cheek, which was beginning to swell and change to a dark purple color. \W /W /W This has to be a bad joke. Rias Gremory, with an unreadable look, thought as she looked somewhat coldly at a nervous blonde. That seems acceptable to me. This way the agreement continues and we resolve some of the enmity that began to form, Zeoticus said with a nod, in accordance with what Lord Phoenix had said. The blond man found himself looking with a small smile at his friend, behind his daughter, and placed a hand on his shoulder before saying a few words to him. Ravel, my dear, I hope you agree to the terms. Your brother can no longer proceed with the arrangement due to his unconventional problem, Lord Phoenix said, clearly uncomfortable with his son's situation. Riser seemed to have an extreme phobia of the color crimson. She didn't understand why, but she guessed it had something to do with the younger Gremory twin. Whether it was a simple object or someone with that hair, anything related to that color sent Riser into a state of extreme panic. He began to realize it at a party they had organized. Someone dressed in an elegant crimson suit made his son panic. The son bit his fingers and ran out babbling nonsense like, "He's coming again, not my balls again, I'm not gay, leave that hole alone, and limbs don't bend like that." This seemed like a minor problem to him, or so it was until he noticed how hysterical he became when they visited his fiancée, Rias, and almost committed suicide by fainting so he wouldn't have to see her anymore. He seriously reconsidered the contract. He didn't want his son to be bound to someone he feared. Perhaps he could be cured, but to date that hadn't happened, so he resorted to another solution to avoid breaking the contract, modifying the terms and presenting them to his friend, Zeoticus, who seemed to accept them. Rias bit her lower lip, glaring at Ravel, clearly unhappy that she was there. The blonde sweated nervously at the anger in the redhead's eyes. I understand, father, I will do this for Onie-sama and for the clan, Ravel replied, smiling slightly before feeling a chill as he detected Rias's dark gaze. With this, it seems that the modified contract is sealed, Zeoticus said, looking at the document in his hand, which was now somewhat modified and had the signatures of those involved. Lord Phoenix nodded with a sigh. Therefore, from this moment forward, the marriage between Rias Gremory, heir to the Gremory clan, and Riser Phoenix, heir to the Phoenix clan, is hereby declared null and void. As a solution to avoid breaking up the marriage between two noble families of the underworld and to prevent disrespect, Naruto Gremory and Ravel Phoenix will take their place in this marriage contract. Crash! The ground cracked from the pressure of the magic Rias was giving off. Her body was covered by a layer of rocks began to float before disappearing from existence while the look on the redhead's face was less than friendly. This can't happen, Rias murmured, her head bowed. Her fists clenched so tightly that small drops of blood trickled from her palms, dripping to the ground before disappearing as well. Zeoticus let out a tired sigh. Rias, you no longer have to worry about marrying someone you don't love. So I hope you're happy. The responsibility now falls on the siblings of those involved, he said, rubbing his temples, a little weary of what his daughter was doing. She should be happy, she wouldn't have to marry that man, but she couldn't bear the thought of her brother marrying someone other than her. Rias shook her head, clearing her thoughts, then glared at her father with a furrowed brow before ceasing her magical outburst. She simply turned and opened the door to her father's office, storming off with furious steps, slamming the door behind her to reveal her current emotional state. Sorry about that, Rias is kind of special when it comes to her twin, Xiaticus said with an apologetic look towards the blonde lord. He dismissed the apology with a wave of his hand. You don't have to do that. I know perfectly well how brothers can act when their affection for each other goes far beyond normal. He remembered Seraphal Leviathan, that woman with a morbid love for her sister. He also remembered Surzex and his incredible love for his younger brothers, but certainly a morbid one for the youngest. Xiaticus felt like slapping himself in the face. Perhaps his son Surzex had done something stupid, or someone was reminding him of his extreme love for his younger children. Shaking her head, she looked at the blonde with a slight smile. She would be her daughter-in-law in the future. Ravel, why don't you go out and familiarize yourself with the place? After all, this will be your home in the not-too-distant future, commented Gremory, obtaining an affirmative nod from the blonde. Of course, if you'll excuse me, Lord Gremory, father, I'll do just that. Ravel bowed formally, holding the hem of her dress in a posture befitting a princess before beginning to walk out with all the dignity of one. Xiaticus became serious as soon as Ravel left the office, and Lord Phoenix followed suit. Have you heard anything? Lord Phoenix asked, closing his eyes for a moment, almost as if he knew the answer to that question. Xiaticus shook his head. No, with things as tense as they are with the Fallen, there's not much you can find out without crossing the border. Besides, several enemy scouts have been seen approaching the borders, only to return as soon as they get what they're looking for, apparently. Lord Phoenix slumped heavily into his seat. It must be those under Kokobil's command. Something's wrong here, I don't think it's just them. We must be missing something very important. Perhaps the faction of the Ancient Mouse, Xiaticus commented, looking at his friend who had thought it over. That may be. However, they must have some other plan. Rizavim didn't participate in the civil war for a reason, Lord Phoenix said as he received a nod from the Gremory. There's no point in thinking about it so much. Sooner or later we'll find out what's really going on, Xiaticus replied, crossing his arms. \W \\\W \W 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 \W. Walking through the garden of the Gremory mansion, Ravel was greeted by the sight of a Venelana gazing fondly at a red lily. The striking color is beautiful, isn't it, little Ravel? Venelana asked without taking her eyes off the beautiful plant. Ravel continued walking until he approached the chestnut tree and smiled gently at how beautiful the plant was. Yes, she is certainly very beautiful, he replied as the brunette gave him a tiny smile. These were her favorites. In the mornings she would go out to look at them for almost hours. Venelana felt a lump in her throat, remembering those moments was a little painful. She had completely lost contact with Graphia, she didn't know where her son was, and to top it all off, it seemed that a war was coming, or the ceasefire would be lifted. I mean, my father, he and Lord Xiaticus made a modification to the old contract. Ravel didn't know how to tell Venelana that she was now the betrothed of her missing son, but she didn't need to say anything. I know, I saw it coming. At least Rias got what she always wanted. If only my little one were here, everything would be better. At least we know he's alive. Ravel thought. Naruto went out with Graphia, with her looking after him. Nothing bad could happen to him. What are you still doing here? The spiteful and cold voice of a certain redhead distracted the duo. Turning completely around, she observed Rias with her gaze drilling into her as if she were trying to skin her alive with her mind. I'm just exploring the place a little, nothing bad, Ravel replied, uncomfortable with how the redhead seemed to want to kill her. Rias, you're being very rude, Venelana scolded with a frown. She just huffed before walking away. Whatever. But she didn't leave without saying a few last words. My brother would never marry a girl like you. The blonde puffed out her cheeks with a blush. She didn't like what Gremory said at all. She was doing this for her clan and for her Onie-sama. If she was honest with herself, she also felt an attraction to the redhead. He was powerful, and power attracted women, especially those of his race. They couldn't blame her for following her instincts. The contract had often foreshadowed what she had in mind. She wanted to get to know him better, to see if they could have something, but now it was obvious that they absolutely had to have something, even with the modified commitment. I hope, by Lucifer, that my relationship isn't like Onie-sama and Rias's. This generation, Venolana murmured, one eyebrow trembling. Rias would be disciplined very seriously for her rudeness. \W \\\W \W \W Let me see if I understood this correctly. Naruto looked at the old woman in front of him with a raised eyebrow, looking at him seriously. I am cursed, he said, receiving a nod from the old woman. That curse didn't affect me immediately because of my vast amount of magic, and that's why my power became useless in the long run. Again, the old woman nodded. And someone like you, who is so advanced in years, has a solution to my curse. The old woman smiled. And you will help me with my problem, on the condition that I assassinate the king, who is guilty of torturing your grandson to death. For the last time, the old woman nodded. No thanks. I don't even know who the king is. Besides, I need to finish something important, said Naruto. Grafia, beside her, simply sighed. Akino laughed softly. The old woman never stopped smiling. The lord and master of all this place is the king. Naruto sighed. Of course, someone with that position was bound to own everything. I will help you, you will help me, we will help each other. You defeat him, he helps you with the curse, and you erase him from existence in the most painful way possible. Naruto stopped and looked at her cautiously. How? That terrifying power you carry in your blood is too conspicuous. For someone like me, sensing it isn't a problem, especially now that it's starting to show signs of becoming something more frightening. The old woman gave him a mysterious look. Well, I guess I can help you. Not entirely convinced, Naruto said, receiving a smile in return from the old woman. I'll thank you in advance. The old woman smiled gently. Naruto nodded. You're welcome. I think. The redhead started walking away, followed by the pair of women at his back. When they were lost in a crowd, the bold woman transformed into a demonic being with horns protruding from the sides of her head. She had pale skin, entirely sulphurous yellow eyes with completely black sclera. Her jet black hair fell down the back of her neck, a single lock of it sticking out across her forehead. He wore a formal suit, a black tuxedo. White gloves on his hands concealed the black claws on his fingers. We'll see how much fun you'll give me. I'll be waiting for you upstairs, Gremory boy, the man whispered with a smile, baring his sharp fangs before vanishing into the darkness, as if swallowed by it. Away from there, Naruto felt a chill run up his spine. Is something wrong, Naruto-sama? Akino looked at her king with concern. He shook his head. It's nothing, I just have a feeling. Grafia glanced behind her, frowning. For a brief moment, she thought she sensed a repulsive presence with powers similar to Surzek's, only almost twice as much, and she was talking about the redhead in his true form. He didn't like feeling that at all. \W \W W W \W That old woman, she gives me a bad feeling. Could it be true that she can help me? Naruto found himself looking at the kingdom of Hamel, from the top of a very tall building. Hey, you can't. BZZT. The impact of a yellow lightning bolt across his face sent him into the world of unconsciousness, all thanks to a smiling Akino. Well, I'll find out if what she told me is true. Naruto thought before jumping and beginning to fall slowly, as if he were a feather, into a dark alley. Raising a small ring of dust as he landed, Naruto looked with mild curiosity at a man drinking on the ground. He looked like a homeless person. Hick, damn bitch, hick, that whore, hick, just because she has a normal dick she sleeps with someone else, hick. The worst part is, it was with my brother, hick, that bitch, how I wish I could see her suffer. The man ranted with a look full of hatred, his eyes had slight tears. Naruto's smile turned malevolent. He understood what Graphia had warned him about, this place truly corrupted you. It was made for demons. Tell me, friend, do you want revenge? I can make it happen. All for a reasonable deal. Naruto emerged from the darkness, startling the man who was taken aback by his sudden arrival. TCH, mind your own business, brat. Pam, buffing. Vomiting all the liquor he had drunk, the man hunched over with a surprised look, a foot embedded in his stomach giving him the answer to what had happened. I'm being nice here, and you're being disrespectful. But I think I can understand the woman who's cheating on you, you're pathetic. Naruto said coldly, earning a heated glare from the man, who simply wiped his mouth in tears. But I've told you, I can make your revenge real. The man looked away. Yeah, right, he replied sarcastically. Naruto raised a finger, revealing an orb of pure magic spinning furiously around. I can do things like this. The man's jaw dropped in surprise. Are you a magician? Naruto's eyebrow twitched. Something like that, he replied tensely. Is what you're saying true? Can you help me? Sure, and all for a small deal that will benefit us both, Naruto said with a gentle smile, behind which was hidden a completely sinister look that was only revealed by those demonic crimson eyes shining for a brief instant. The man, though hesitant, nodded. What is this deal? Naruto smiled with his eyes closed, giving an appearance of kindness. I will give you power, power beyond your comprehension. With it you will have your revenge, in return, your body will be the vessel to sustain my being. The man took a step back. What? What's that for? Naruto gave a sad smile. It's because I can't stay in the physical world for very long. By helping you, you'll also help me enjoy the physical world a little more before I return to my own. The man understood, giving a slight nod. I think I can understand, fine, I accept, as long as I can get revenge on that damn bitch and my idiot brother, and that whole shitty family. Naruto extended his hand, covered by a white glove. Accepting the handshake, the man agreed to the deal, sealing it as crimson magic seemed to flow from the redhead's hand into the man's body. A moment later, Naruto turned around with a chilling smile. The deal is done. You can go back and begin your revenge. I'll be back another time. The redhead disappeared into the darkness of the alley. The man could only admire in awe the latent power he could feel in his body. She chuckled softly, then burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. You damn bitch, I'll make you pay dearly. \W /\W 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 Naruto-sama. Akino watched the redhead laugh with a huge smile. It's okay, Akino. I'm just experimenting with something, Naruto replied before looking up at the sky with his arms outstretched. Graphia gave him a serious look before sighing. It was a perfectly valid deal, Graphia, you saw it, I was aware of what I would be agreeing to, Naruto said with a big smile. Taking emotional advantage of a human being to make them accept the deal, I don't think that's being aware of what they're agreeing to, the silver-haired woman replied firmly. Naruto turned his face slightly to give her a closed-eye smile. Don't worry, you'll understand the true meaning of what I'm doing in the future. The redhead sat on the edge of the building before crossing his arms. I'll be busy. Without another word, he closed his eyes. The silver-haired woman had a deadly serious look. Akino placed a finger under her chin before smiling and going to embrace the unconscious body of her beloved king. \W /\W /\W /W /\W Vomiting completely dark blood, the man from before began to convulse in the street, being seen by people who gave him a glance before surrounding him to see what was happening. Writhing in pain, her black hair took on a reddish hue, her skin began to take on a whiter tone, as if she were royalty before her eyes opened with a smile on her lips, showing reddish orbs and tiny fangs. This is what it feels like to possess someone's body, not how I imagined it. It was different from how he did it with his clones. His power was extremely limited. But at least he retained some of his magic, 1,000th of it, but it was far more than any high-class demon possessed. He had to make changes to his body so that it could accommodate such a vast amount of energy. "Sir, are you all right?" An 8-year-old boy asked, watching as he slowly got up with a smile. "Of course." Naruto stood up carrying the man's body, who apparently was named Kenji. The stored information was received with complete calm by Naruto, who only smiled fiercely shortly afterwards. "I have things to do, don't forget to listen to your mother," Naruto said before moving and crossing the crowd, then moving into an alley and disappearing into a blur. "I don't have a mother," the boy murmured with a tearful look. \W 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 Not a bad place, but my little hut is several times bigger, Naruto muttered, curiously eyeing the mansion before him. Kenji's family possessed a certain amount of wealth, and in this world, or floor, they were considered nobles. "Let's have some fun with the humans on this floor." I didn't know if the humans in this place were created, or if they had once been in the human world and were kidnapped and locked up on this floor. "Kenji-sama," a maid said with a look of disgust before changing to surprise as soon as she noticed the physical changes in his appearance. "Oh, whatever. I have a deal to keep," Naruto said, walking past the maid. "Wait, Kyoko-sama asked me to tell you." "Just shut up for a second, I'm about to have some fun and you come to interrupt me," Naruto said, looking at her with his red eyes, silencing her and making her take a step back in fear. With a smile, Naruto continued walking. "Don't worry, if you hear screams, we're just having fun," he said as an afterthought. Without waiting for a response, Naruto entered the mansion, opening the door with a single push of his palm. The human's memories didn't hold much information about the king of this floor or world. "Well, I just need to get a better puppet." Upon reaching a room, he kicked the double doors, ripping them off their hinges and sending them flying. There was an exclamation from the other side of the room. Naruto entered and smiled with amusement at the surprised couple lying in bed. "Oh, wow, I didn't know you guys were playing Twister naked," Naruto remarked mockingly as he walked with his hands in his pockets. "Kenji-kun, this isn't what it looks like," the woman said, sweat trickling down her forehead. Naruto grinned broadly. "Stupid human, I'm not your Kenji-kun," he said, mockingly imitating Kyoko's voice when she named the human she was possessing. The woman opened her mouth, but was silenced by a snap of Naruto's fingers, which caused both humans to freeze. "Let's play a little before the family arrives," Naruto said as he made a leather bag appear in a red flash. "There's only one rule, don't die so fast." What followed was accompanied by terrified screams filled with the purest pain of both humans. \W \W W \W What a nice family dinner, don't you think? Naruto smiled with one hand under his chin. Seated in the chairs surrounding the large table was Kyoko, bleeding profusely, her fingers bent in a painful fashion, the bone protruding from her skin reddened by the abuse. Kenji's brother, whose name Naruto didn't bother to learn, was in an even worse state. His genitals were missing, and his fingers had been cleanly sliced off, the wounds cauterized. The human's parents were looking terrified, tied to the chair just like everyone else. "You damned monster! What did you do to my son?" The father, with a look of fear, shouted while struggling with the restraints. Naruto laughed. "It was just a simple deal. I'll give you your revenge on all of you in exchange for you letting me use your body as a host." Hick. Kenji-kun, sniff. "Don't cry, woman, a whore doesn't look good crying over a client," Naruto commented, giving a mocking smile that threatened to split his face. "Kenji-kun, you're not like that, my Kenji-kun." Hick. "If you want to see it so badly, I can bring it to you," Naruto commented as he finally sliced the meat on his plate, before eating it with dignified manners using his fork. "Can you bring it?" Kyoko looked at him hopefully. Swirling the wine a little, she drank it before wincing. "Not as good as I'd like, but what can you expect from humans? And yes, I could bring it, but only if you admit you're a cheating whore, a bitch who loves to sleep with her husband's brother and revels in carnal pleasure and lust. As such, a free whore for your brother-in-law." She gulped down the wine, admitting that the one she kept in her pocket dimension was much better. She didn't drink much, She did it more out of curiosity than anything else, and from there she began to recreate wine recipes, creating the wine to store in her pocket dimension. The conflicted look lingered for a few moments before Kyoko nodded resignedly. I am just a cheating whore who L loves F fucking with K Kenji Kuen's brother, and L enjoys car pleasure and L lust. H hick. I'm just, hick, a free whore for M my brother-in-law. Hick, sniff. Kenji Kuen. Ha ha ha, well, just for fun, I'll bring your dear and beloved Kenji, Naruto said with a smile before the physical changes returned to normal, his eyes changing to a dark purple. Are you? Where? Her eyes opened slightly at the sight before her. Kenji Kuen. The woman's gaze fell on the named boy, who only made a face. Son, what have you done? His father looked at him with disappointment. Me too, they think you're a disgrace, a stain on the family, right? Your dear wife keeps sleeping with your brother, will you allow that? The whispering voices did not leave him in peace, his gaze changed from regret to hatred and anger. But, look at them, this is what you wanted, why don't you come back and give them back what they did to you? More and more voices began to whisper to him, some mentioning things they had done to him in the past, making him more susceptible by showing him fragments of his memories. For a moment he seemed to react to what he was doing before his eyes showed hatred and disgust. W // W / W / W W / Naruto laughed out loud, enjoying what he had done. Playing with humans is more interesting. Boom. Crash. A well-placed fist to his head sent him flying from the rooftop of the building to the ground, leaving a crater as dust covered him. He's going too far, he needs to control himself, or I'll be forced to make him reconsider, Grafia said in a cold voice. Naruto shook his head. Well, shit. Those urges are worse than I thought. Akino looked away, a light blush rising to her cheeks. She found herself admiring and captivated by her king's laughter, she found it incredibly sexy. Naruto stood up, dusting himself off before flying back to his place on the edge of the building. For now, I have to find the king of this world and kill him to go up one more floor, Naruto commented more calmly. He was no longer driven by the desire to wreak havoc and chaos upon the kingdom. He would need to find a way to control those impulses, he didn't want to end up in an asylum. While it was his fault what he had done to that human, sooner or later he would take matters into his own hands, whether it was revenge or suicide to escape the emotional pain. The truth was, he didn't care. He felt a little guilty, but it only hastened the possible future. W / W / W W / Whistling a calming tune, Naruto found himself walking with his arms crossed behind his head. Behind him, a large plume of smoke rose as the human's mansion was engulfed in flames. It didn't last long. Naruto thought, pausing to move his right arm and point to the burning mansion with his index finger before a small red sphere shot out at breakneck speed. In a simple blur, it abruptly crashed into the enormous building before the place erupted completely in a red light. You saved me the trouble of having to find you, said Naruto, turning around to see a kind of lizard man with yellow scales. Her green hair swayed in the magical wind, her violet eyes stared at him with extreme intensity, and her fierce smile revealed her long, sharp teeth. It was impossible to ignore the chaos you caused with the family that serves under my command, he replied, his eyes flashing a dull yellow for a second. Let's have some fun. Let's see if you're stronger than your partner, Naruto replied with a smile. A grimace of displeasure crossed the green-haired man's face. We're not partners. Palm. I don't care to know, Naruto muttered, his fist embedded in the green-haired man's abdomen. The man spat blood with a surprised look before being thrown off as the buildings around him shook violently and a deep crater formed beneath the redhead's feet. End of chapter. Chapter 9. Crash. How can a brat like that have such strength? The demon thought, rising from the enormous crater with a trail of dark blood running down the edge of his mouth. A red blur fell from the sky, crashing down before their eyes with a loud bang, raising an immense curtain of dust. My greeting didn't do anything to you, did it? Naruto asked mockingly as he stepped out of the curtain of dust, dusting off his clothes before smiling fiercely. He could only chuckle softly. I barely felt. Palm. Great, We'll be able to play for a long time, said Naruto, watching as the demon took off upwards, leaving behind a series of wind rings that formed in a chain before it disappeared into the clouds. High in the clouds, the demon winced in pain, stroking his chin. He almost knocked my head off with one blow. Who the hell is that brat? He didn't get any higher, as he was sent crashing back to solid ground by a powerful spinning kick to the back that only created a wave of wind that shook the clouds before sending him to the ground, leaving several rings of wind behind. The moment it hit the ground, a massive jolt, like an earthquake, shook the ground. A deep crater formed as the demon doubled over, Naruto collapsing with his feet digging into its stomach. More blood spurted from his mouth, which hovered in the air, swaying with agonizing slowness. Leaping forward and delivering a powerful kick to his cheek, Naruto backed away as his enemy was sent flying, a path of blood forming in the ground. The mouthful of blood began to fall slowly, with a few drops falling off before Naruto flew off like a crimson lightning bolt at full speed. At the same time the blood was scattered in various directions by the air current that arose shortly after. Ghggg. Biting the inside of his cheek, he watched with some anger as the redhead grabbed him by the face before throwing him like a ball to one side. You know, I thought it would be more fun, said Naruto, disappointed by the green-haired demon. His strength was disappointing, and his speed was, to say the least, pathetic and incredibly slow like a turtle. The debris vanished as the green-haired man burned his magical aura in clear anger, his face contorting in fury as his eyes turned a dull yellow, too green, dragon-like wings sprouting from his back. A reptilian tail emerged from his coccyx, its tip dripping with a purple liquid. I'll kill you. Without mercy. You damned brat. His scream sent magical waves of green light through the air, and stormy winds of pure magic formed cracks for tens of kilometers around. His furious gaze fell upon the smiling redhead, his arms crossed behind his back as if nothing mattered to him, as if he were not a threat, and that angered him greatly. Swoosh, palm. It took off at full speed in a thunderous roar that shook the surrounding earth, only to be sent crashing back to the ground, courtesy of a kick from an expressionless Naruto who merely dodged the blow and attacked immediately. I expected, more than just attacks from a furious, stupid reptile, Naruto muttered, unhappy that his enemy seemed too weak. Well, he trained like crazy, but he was hoping for a bit of excitement with the owner of the second floor. The guardians were supposed to get stronger as you climbed the tower, but that didn't seem to be the case. Either that, or he was just incredibly strong. Come on, buddy, this can't be all your strength, Naruto said, stopping a fist and grabbing his enemy's limb by the wrist as furious winds whipped through his red hair. Shiny, swish, palm. Well, this battle is really disappointing me, Naruto muttered, having dodged a swipe that split the mountains in the distance, before hitting the green-haired man squarely in the face with a fist so strong that it almost seemed to take his head off because of the way his neck stretched, only to then see him fly off like a simple blurry green smudge. A crimson magic circle with the Gremory crest appeared in front of his left palm, small red sparks began to emerge from it, and then a gigantic crimson beam closed the distance in just a blink. Boom! The explosion was witnessed by the redhead, his face blank. The wind whipped his hair and clothes around him. He didn't like that his enemy was so weak, or rather, he'd reduce the intensity of his training in the future. Who was he kidding? If these were the results of that training, he'd never give it up. Raising an eyebrow at the green flames heading towards his location, he simply disappeared at a dizzying speed, only to reappear some distance away to see how the ground seemed to melt as if the fire were acidic, or contained a high toxicity. For a dragon-demon hybrid, you're stronger than a high-class demon, Naruto said, slowly turning around to see the green-haired boy's surprised expression. As magic, Naruto replied dully before dodging and starting to move to avoid the attacks of the aforementioned hybrid, but he seemed to be toying with his enemy because of the way he was turning and spinning along with very extravagant poses, as if he were in some kind of dance. Stop playing with me. His exclamation was answered by a kick right across the chin that left his face looking skyward before a second kick to his cheek sent him flying sideways, in the process producing a loud crack of bone. There's no point in fighting someone so weak, why don't you fight my creations instead? Naruto said, beginning to smile darkly. Emerging from the crater, he looked into those bloodthirsty red eyes that made him seriously wonder if he really was a brat. A huge magic circle formed beneath Naruto's feet, and from it emerged what appeared to be an exact copy of the dragon-demon hybrid, except its hair was black with red tips, its heterochromatic eyes were blue in the left and red in the right, and its dragon features were a dark red. Let's begin the game. In just a millisecond he had to cross his arms to avoid a direct blow to his face. He counterattacked with a knee strike that the dark-haired man dodged by jumping before sending his palm towards the head of the green-haired man, who only grunted when he buried his face in the ground. Splash! The redhead's creation was blown up by a green gas that caused it to inflate rapidly, then burst like a balloon. Something like that is nothing to me, the hybrid said arrogantly. But he didn't like the redhead's smile one bit. Excellent. From another magic circle, another copy of the hybrid began to form. Frowning, he was about to start going directly against his copy, only to stop as soon as he saw with clear shock the hundreds of copies of himself with different variations, coming out of the same circle. Otherwise, it would be very boring. Naruto finished speaking before snapping his fingers, causing each copy to shoot out like a bullet in the direction of the shocked green-haired boy. The battle resumed. Unlike the first time he had easily disposed of his copy, these were not only too numerous, but also possessed far more power than his original copy. A floating throne adorned with gold began to form from red magic particles. Naruto took a comfortable seat as a bag of popcorn appeared in his hand in a flash of red, which he promptly devoured. I don't think I'll get bored so easily now, he muttered, chewing popcorn, before a crystal glass appeared in his other hand, which quickly filled with orange juice. She took a sip before letting go, as if by magic. The glass had a faint red glow as it floated in the air. My life is good. \W /\W /\W /\W. A mouthful of blood escaped from the mouth of an armored demon. His helmet was completely shattered, revealing his injured face, while his pale yellow hair stuck to his face with sweat. Right in front of his eyes, a fallen angel with 5 pairs of wings was staring at him boredly. Guards like you are truly disappointing. Kokabeel, you damned bastard. It was the last thing that escaped his lips before he closed his eyes, facing imminent death from being painfully pierced through the heart by a spear of light. Wasting my energy on garbage makes me nauseous, Kokabeel said, looking contemptuously at the corpses of several demons around what appeared to be an observation camp. Flapping its wings, it took flight before creating a large spear of light which it then threw to the ground before flying away, leaving behind a huge explosion of tainted holy energy that totally obliterated the camp. \W /\W 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 /\W. Sirzex frowned. He never liked attending meetings with the Council of Elders, those greedy people who only cared about power and believed themselves to be the true owners of the underworld. Seraphol was by his side, as always, in her magical girl outfit, playing with her wand. His thoughts were focused on his little Sotan, his little sister, the cutest and most beautiful, and anyone who said otherwise would end up frozen to death from hypothermia. Falbium's eyes were closed, he seemed to be meditating. Well, the truth is, he was asleep in a contemplative position. He had learned this posture precisely for moments like this. No one would disturb his sleep if they found him in this position. Ajuka, well, the scientist was just playing with a Rubik's Cube, only if he didn't finish it in 2 minutes, it would explode with such a powerful blast that it would wipe out 3/4 of the entire underworld. Yes, playing that way excited him more. It was no wonder his inventions were too much for ordinary demons. Entering the meeting room, the council elders wasted no time in taking their seats with all the arrogance in the world, sitting as if they were more important. Sirzex, why have you called this meeting? Zekrom asked, his fingers interlaced, as he looked at the redhead with mild curiosity. One of his eyebrows twitched, but he sighed, letting the disrespect go. He had more important things to do than argue childishly with an old man. The Fallen are crossing the borders and attacking scout camps. It seems they are members under Kokabeel's command. I don't think Azazel is the type to initiate attacks that would lead to war, the redhead reported, looking at those present. The reactions were more than evident. Those filthy birds. We have to give them what they deserve. Yes, we can't just stand idly by. Zekrom raised a hand, stopping the screams. Sirzex, I hope you didn't gather us here just to warn us about this, he said with an inner grimace of displeasure. The redhead shook his head. No, this is to let you know that I'll be holding a meeting with the leader of the Fallen, Azazel, to ask for an explanation before making a decision. It wasn't long before shouts of indignation and anger erupted. Once again they were silenced by Baal. I'm not questioning your leadership, but you must get rid of Kokabeel. Zekrom had a cold look. That could lead to a war that would end up starting the Great War of Old again, Surzex replied. Ajuka spoke without looking up. Surzex, it's true that this could happen, but the lives of those demons shouldn't be taken for granted. If you want peace, you must be prepared for war. If only Kokabeel is involved, then Gregory won't interfere, leaving the matter as if Kokabeel were acting alone, without needing to start another war. What if Gregory gets involved? Surzex asked with a serious look. We will hold a three-way meeting, where we will introduce a certain group. They will only join when a major threat becomes involved. With a turn that was too swift, he finished his cube before looking up and giving his friend a small smile. He had even more plans he wouldn't reveal. Those were the ones he would resort to if the war started again. \W /W 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 Boom. A mountain was erased as the green-haired hybrid flew away through the air, his left limb having been torn off by that explosion. He nearly deflected a flaming spear with his claws before having to avoid a sea of green flames. He's gotten stronger as time goes on. But it's getting boring. Naruto said, taking a sip of his juice before his glass dispersed into red particles. The hybrid had already managed to kill several of its creations, but it wasn't enough to eliminate them all. A good number of copies still lingered in the air, gathering their magic to unleash flames or toxic, poison-laden attacks. Resting his limb on the armrest, Naruto let his chin fall into his palm as he watched curiously as the green-haired boy was bombarded from all sides while the toxic wind seemed to heat up the atmosphere. I give you 5 minutes of resistance. A very familiar female voice could be heard from behind him, before arms wrapped around his neck, embracing him as warm breath hit his ear. Akino, could you let go of me? Despite asking that, Naruto made no effort to push her away. A soft giggle was her response. I don't know, could you force me? Naruto smiled before taking her by the arms, then effortlessly lifting her and twirling her in the air so she landed in his lap, both staring at each other. One with surprise, the other with amusement. Mao, that's not fair, the dark-haired girl complained childishly, her arms crossed beneath her breasts, which were larger than someone her age should have. Nothing is fair, Naruto replied with a tiny smile. Akino smiled, bringing her face closer to Naruto's, their noses touching as they could feel each other's hot breath. The hormones were doing their thing, a greater effect for a lustful race like the redheads, and a medium one for Akino, who was fallen. Her deep red orbs gazed into those violet irises. Their lips brushed against each other as Naruto's hands moved up, caressing her lower back with one hand while with the other he stroked her jet black hair away from her face before moving it away from him and placing it behind her ear. Akino also moved her hands, one touching the redhead's shoulder and the other by the side of his neck as she leaned closer. The closeness between them intensified. Akino was the first to surrender, pressing her lips to the redhead's, who quickly returned the kiss with greater intensity. Following his instincts, he increased the suction on her lips, causing the dark-haired woman to gasp softly from the force of his actions, which caused her pain. A blush spread across her cheeks as Naruto gazed at her with those striking eyes. In the past, his eyes had been blue-green, but they shifted to red when he used his destructive power, and now, somehow, the color red was permanently etched into his irises. Naruto stroked her cheek with one hand before the one on her lower back slowly began to move upwards, leaving small caresses on her back until he reached her hair, which he stroked while slowly beginning to gather it together. His other hand let go of her cheek to help his other limb gather her hair into a ponytail. When it was done, the redhead pulled hard on him, moving her away a little, but without separating his lips, then leaned closer to her, the dark-haired woman having a glassy look in her eyes. Naruto decided to lightly bite her lower lip before tugging at it with his small fangs. Akino moaned as she watched with her violet eyes as her king tugged at her lip, before releasing it and bringing their mouths together again. Ahem, am I interrupting something? Grafia asked while looking at the duo. She had one eyebrow raised, the pair were kissing while the battle raged on in the background. The intense explosion sent winds that violently shook everything, but the duo seemed completely unconcerned. Slowly pulling away, Naruto gave her a small smile. Akino smiled, pressing her face against the redhead's chest as she gazed at him adoringly. Nothing, Naruto replied as he began to slowly brush his bishop's hair with one hand while with the other he stroked his lower back. I didn't think so, Gremory said, turning her gaze towards the dark-haired woman. The good stuff was about to start. Akino thought, casting a gloomy glance at the silver-haired girl who merely raised an eyebrow. \W /W 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 I won't let that wedding happen. Rias thought, her eyes fixed on the black-red orb in her palms. She would never let that wedding begin. Her brother belonged to no one but her. He did not belong to the Phoenix family. Her twin belonged to her, and only to her. I will prevent that from happening by any means possible. The redhead let out the breath she'd been holding. She already had a knight in her nobility. If she wanted to do what she had planned, she'd have to start with something she didn't particularly like. Training, that didn't sound very appealing to him. Demons didn't need training, their power increased with time. He certainly didn't like the idea, but if what he heard was true, his beloved twin had been training, and the results were more than remarkable. From the conversation he'd overheard, accidentally, yes, accidentally, between his mother and Gremory, his twin possessed absurd levels of magic that would only increase further. But I have no one to help me. Onie-sama could help me. Yumi could also practice with me. Rias smiled slightly. No one would take her twin away from her, even if it meant starting a war. Well, war was just around the corner, but that's something she didn't know yet. \W /W 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 Kneeling and battered, without both arms and without an eye, the green-haired hybrid was found while a redhead with a bored expression looked at him. It was fun at the time, but now the fun is over, said Naruto, pointing at the green-haired boy with his index finger, from which a red orb began to form, emitting sparks. Crum! A purple beam stopped him from continuing his attack. A smoking crater had formed, and from the black smoke emerged the same demon who had disguised himself as an old woman. Judging by his smile, he seemed to be enjoying the sight before him. You're more interesting than I expected, Gremory boy. The next moment, Naruto looked at him coldly. No one in this tower had ever addressed him by his last name. Who are you? In a millisecond he was standing in front of the dark-haired man, who was taller than the redhead and therefore had to raise his gaze slightly. Only your humble servant who finds what you're doing entertaining. His yellow eyes flashed with joy for a second. Which floor do you belong to? Naruto asked after a moment of silence. It wasn't very difficult to guess, since the black-haired boy exuded demonic essence, and that overwhelming energy was similar to Enteritis, as if they were different, but so similar to the tower, as if they were connected to each other, but at the same time very separate. That's irrelevant, replied the guard, raising a hand to stop a blow without much effort. Boom! The simple roar shook the earth as an earthquake occurred while Naruto stared intently at the black-haired man. Then I just need to see how strong you are to get an idea, Naruto replied before striking his enemy in the abdomen with his knee. Before he could touch him, the dark-haired man had stepped back a little, letting his limb pass, and then pushed his palm in front of the redhead's chest. From his palm came a powerful beam of dark purple energy that hit the surprised redhead squarely. It traveled a great distance in a matter of microseconds before crashing into a plain with scorched soil. I was going to remove the curse, but I changed my mind, said the dark-haired man, floating with the help of wings that resembled those of a crow. Taking on the appearance of an old woman, that never seemed right to me, Naruto muttered, slowly getting up. She had sensed something dark coming from that old woman, which was why she didn't want to accept a deal. Who would have thought that what she had felt was the dark presence of the guardian? Come on, Gremory boy, when you're ready, said the guardian, his eyes fixed on the redhead. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Naruto muttered before launching into the attack, causing his simple movement as he took off to create a huge updraft while a massive roar echoed. But that did little good against the dark-haired boy, who easily evaded his attacks. In mid-air, Naruto barely avoided being pierced by black feathers that emitted small traces of darkness. Boom! He certainly didn't avoid the blow to his cheek, which sent him flying in a trail of air. Stretching out his hand, he formed an electric spear, which he quickly hurled at the dark-haired man, who in turn created a completely black orb with a purple rim, which he threw against his attack. He did not see the result coming. His spear was completely consumed by the dark magic of the enemy attack before being dispersed into simple violet particles. His surprise cost him dearly, and that came in the form of a punch to his cheek, followed by a knee to the stomach, and ending with a hammer blow from both hands all over the redhead's back, sending him sailing and crashing to the ground in a deep crater. "Come on, show me your great power. Weren't you disappointed with your last battle? Well, here I am, stronger than that reptile." "Yes, this is what I was looking for," said Naruto, jumping up, a smile splitting his lips and his eyes shining maniacally. "That is." He was interrupted by the redhead, who, in a crimson blur, was already in front of him with a fist about to strike his nose. Without much trouble, he deflected the attack with his wrist before hitting the redhead on the chin. Did it get faster? That question piqued his curiosity. For a brief moment he thought the redhead had increased his speed. Swoosh. No, I wasn't wrong. Naruto increased his speed a little. Pam. But that wasn't enough to land a blow against the dark-haired man with the amused expression. "And with this kind of power you wanted to climb?" he questioned, raising an eyebrow. He couldn't fathom the thought that with this strength he wanted to climb the tower. Crimson magic erupted around him, raising a gigantic pillar that reached the clouds, where a hole was torn open by the magic. The clouds seemed to spin like a tornado from the furious winds unleashed by this release of magical energy. Naruto let out a breath. "I'm going to let myself go," he murmured with a small smile. In a crimson blur, he crashed into the dark-haired man, who was only thrown slightly by the impact. The rocks floated slowly in the air, the enormous crater beneath the redhead's feet deepening as soon as he took off again, while the rocks, moving so slowly, seemed suspended in midair. A loud crash erupted as his fist collided with his enemy's palm, his other hand flying out in a closed fist. The dark-haired man tilted his head slightly before driving his left knee into the redhead's stomach, sending him flying several meters into the air before he was hurled back down by a punch to the chest. The dark-haired figure blurred due to the high speeds at which he moved, becoming nothing more than a dark smudge following the crimson blur that is Naruto. A resounding crash erupted as his blurred form collided with the redhead, creating a powerful shockwave that sent Naruto soaring into the sky. A dark sphere with purple tones followed shortly after. Naruto frowned before regaining his balance in the air, then pointed with his right hand in the direction of the attack. A magic circle formed in front of his palm. At blinding speed, a beam of pure magical energy of a dark crimson hue shot out as the air around it seemed to catch fire. Boom! With a tilt of his head, he managed to evade a thrust from long, sharp, dark nails. Without wasting a moment, he moved his right hand, striking his enemy on the chin, who, judging by his smile, didn't seem to be affected much. He covered himself with both arms, using his black wings as an extra limb, and had to block the attack. He felt small cuts on both limbs. The dark feathers weren't normal. "It's not as fun as I imagined, you're weak," said the dark-haired man with a cheeky look. "Oh, now you did it, you damn crow." Naruto thought with a small twitch in his eyebrow. Hundreds of magic circles formed above them both, all of varying sizes. "There's a reason I don't want to use magic attacks so often," Naruto muttered before raising both hands and then immediately lowering them, uttering a few words that were overheard by the curious winged black-haired boy. "Ruin of the worlds." Wait, what the hell did that brat say? If I heard correctly, that name didn't bode well, and he didn't like the smile he started to see on the redhead's lips. Krum, Biom, Roararg, BZZT, this damn brat, it's unfair that he has all that magic. The guardian thought, a drop of sweat trickling down the side of his head. Enormous meteorites of immense size began to emerge, gigantic crimson beams swirling before they began to fall. What appeared to be chimeras of all kinds roared out with ferocity before descending with such tremendous speed that they caused the air to heat up. A tornado of uncontrollable winds began to descend, red rays swirling at its center as it began to merge with a tsunami of immeasurable size. Krum. The sky seemed to tremble uncontrollably before it split like glass, revealing a dark, endless abyss in which two enormous, slanted yellow eyes displayed an endless hunger. What the hell did he do? In his mind, something like this is not possible. Several completely black tentacles emerged from that abyss. Their size was large enough to encompass a small city with just one of them. From one of the many circles, a sphere of fire began to emerge, but its colossal size made it look like a miniature sun. It wasn't just one, several more began to emerge from among so many magic circles. Moon-sized rocks covered in flames and electricity began to descend in the same way. Does he want to destroy the world? He seriously wondered, with such a magnitude of attacks, destroying the world wouldn't be so complicated. In fact, he could bet that this was enough to erase at least 3 worlds by the impact. And they kept coming, and many more magical attacks kept coming. But I won't let that happen. Her eyes met the redhead's gaze with seriousness. Allowing one of the many worlds in the tower to be destroyed would cause a loss in their forces. He released a large amount of dark magic from his body, forming hundreds of thousands of completely black spheres. With a flick of his wrist, all the spheres shot into the sky, colliding with each and every magical attack. Several black orbs crashed against a single attack, ranging from a single orb to hundreds. The darkness gnawed at the attacks, covering them before absorbing and destroying them, as if it were a black hole that sucked them in with no possibility of escape. He spent several moments creating more orbs, which he quickly began to hurl against those massive attacks. He was tempted to use his ultimate weapon to end it all, even the life of that Gremory boy, but for 2 reasons he didn't. First, if he did, the world wouldn't be able to withstand it and would be consumed by darkness before being erased. His second reason was that he needed a vast amount of magic, much of which he had already wasted stopping the redhead's attacks. And well, his strength was limited by a restriction on accessing the lower floors. His breathing became heavy, sweat ran down his face, and his smile was gone. Now he had a dark look directed at the redhead, who seemed unaffected in the slightest by spending all that magic. I'll kill him, as soon as he stops attacking. Damn it! How much magic could he have? It seemed like hours to him, when in reality he spent minutes launching his attacks without ceasing. Finally, after so much wasted magic, the attack stopped. A sigh of relief escaped his lips. That amount of magic would cost him a serious rest to replenish. Oh wow, you managed to stop the attack at 10% of its full power. That was good. What the redhead said made him feel a small shiver. 10%? Seriously? What the hell is wrong with this kid? Hey, if I unleash it twice as hard, will you be able to handle it? Naruto asked with a wide grin, his eyes shaded by his hair giving him a demonic appearance. Pursing his lips, he clenched his teeth and hands. This was a stupid joke. Someone like him, a guardian of all things, felt panicked. What a bad joke. In a flash, he closed the distance between himself and the redhead, then struck him squarely in the stomach with a dark orb that sent him flying before exploding completely into a powerful purple-violet-black dome. Control yourself, he can't use that useless power, therefore he doesn't present a real danger, he muttered to himself. Without that power, he couldn't do him the slightest harm. Swoosh! It took off flying, approaching the site of the explosion, only to have to dodge a beam of red magic that collided with a mountain in the distance, which was erased along with others by the gigantic dome that sent powerful currents of wind. He fired a dark bullet with the tip of his finger, which pierced a hole through the redhead's man, who grunted a little with his annoyed gaze fixed on his sulphurous yellow eyes. Naruto turned his face, due to a punch that sent him diagonally towards the ground, leaving several rings behind before he collided with the ground, in a gigantic crater. Slowly descending, I walked as the redhead stood up, his wound emitting smoke. Damn kid, you're too dangerous, even without using your power, said the dark-haired man before kicking the redhead in the side, who only growled before receiving a palm strike to his chin, followed by having his face grabbed before being thrown to the ground, making the crater deeper. Coughing slightly, Naruto looked up. Well, you're stronger than I expected. Just out of curiosity, am I really cursed? Raising an eyebrow, the dark-haired guardian shrugged. He was going to kill him anyway, so it wouldn't make any difference to tell him before cutting off his head. Yes, blame the bloodline, he said, creating a small sword of darkness. And is there a way to remove the curse? The redhead asked without a single expression of fear or panic. In fact, there are 2 ways. One of them requires the attribute of darkness that I possess, and the second is with the treasure of flesh, he replied, raising the small sword. Naruto smiled. You mean that treasure hoarded by the greedy dragon hybrid? The dark-haired man stopped, a clear surprise on his face at what Gremory had said. As Magic, Naruto replied before chuckling slightly. Growling, he slashed at full speed. The redhead was beginning to pose a serious danger, and needed to be eliminated before he became an even greater threat. Slash. As he severed the redhead's head, blood spurted out, and he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. He didn't know exactly what, he couldn't put his finger on it, but something was definitely wrong. He stared at the headless body of the Gremory boy, before frowning. The feeling remained the same. Clones are the best, aren't they? The redhead's voice came from behind him. Turning slowly with an expression of clear shock, I glimpsed the same redhead whose head I had cut off, intact and without a single mark of dirt on his clothes. By the way, I appreciate your kindness in telling me how to remove the curse, Naruto said, a clear hint of mockery in his voice. In his hand, a golden artifact adorned with red and purple jewels was clearly visible. He had done his own research to obtain what he most needed. No, murmured the dark-haired man, that artifact is supposed to be kept safe. Seriously, thank you so much, the redhead commented, imbuing magic into the artifact, which only shone blindingly before the same glow completely enveloped the redhead. I'm not going to allow it, she said quietly, her teeth grinding. Before he could make a move, he had to dodge a white beam and a stream of ice that nearly hit him from the side. Era, I've never seen such an ugly crow. Akino said with a smile on her lips, white sparks fluttering around her fingers. Beside him stood a Graphia with a cold expression. Having to search for that artifact in that treasury took longer than expected. Graphia thought, raising her eyebrows. She and the dark-haired woman had to move as soon as the guardian from an upper floor appeared, all on Naruto's orders. They were to find a hidden artifact that could help her while he wasted enough time. That's why she'd been a little late, after finally finding the exact location of the treasury, which clearly wasn't in the damned castle. I'm very, very angry right now, said the dark-haired man, his body covered by a thin layer of darkness, which exerted a pressure on the atmosphere. An even greater magical pressure made him stare wide-eyed at the redhead now covered in crimson magical energy, which was turning blackish red. Ha ha ha, yes. Come with Dad. Naruto exclaimed, raising his arms. The artifact had safely stored him in its pocket dimension after he used it. His simple action sent waves of magic that caused catastrophic tremors, so enormous that the ground cracked as the mountains split in half vertically. The power within his body erupted, unleashing winds so immense they seemed to become tornadoes. The ground began to be consumed by the dark reddish energy. How I missed this. The energy began to drain from his body as the heavy air made it difficult to breathe. Having finished absorbing all the energy, a happy Naruto was seen holding an orb of pod, which he promptly threw aside, obliterating some rocks on contact, much to the redhead's delight. Alright, now I feel more alive. Round 2. Naruto asked while staring at the surprised black-haired man. What a bad joke. The dark-haired man's eyes glared angrily at those blood-red orbs. End of chapter. Chapter 10. Naruto grinned, grabbing the dark-haired man's face before throwing him forward, causing him to crash through 3 mountains that then crumbled into simple rocks, leaving behind clouds of dust from the impact of the body. It pierced the dust clouds, leaving a hole in each cloud it crossed at high speed before becoming a crimson blur, which after tiny milliseconds crashed headlong into the dark blur. Boom! The crash caused a powerful wave of wind, but by the time it was created, the dark blur had already been struck again, being carried to new heights before being hit by the crimson blob that brought it down before knocking it to one side, leaving behind pure waves of wind so strong that some clouds were scattered. Slamming his knee into the center of his enemy's stomach, Naruto sent the demon flying several kilometers into the air. The demon gasped, exhaling a mouthful of blood before being thrown back. The redhead watched the small patch of blood with curiosity. It rippled in the air so slowly that he had time to tap it with a gloved finger, making it ripple as he smiled faintly. He glanced at it one last time before clasping his hands together, forming a blackish-red bow, from which he drew back the string. Instantly, an arrow began to form from particles of the pod. The redhead merely aimed with an amused expression before releasing the magically crafted string. The arrow turned into a blackish-red comet that left a small boom as soon as it took off. Boom! A huge explosion occurred as soon as the arrow crashed into the dark blur, which was passing through a hill before the powerful impact. Immediately, a large blackish-red dome began to expand, erasing everything it touched. Pulling the magic string, 3 arrows instantly formed. Releasing them with a curious look, all the arrows took off before beginning to spin around each other and then merging along the way, forming a much larger blackish-red comet. That's strange. Naruto thought, holding the bow, looking at it curiously before dissipating it into small magical particles. He felt his power weakening, he couldn't pinpoint what was affecting him. It's not finished yet, he thought, clenching his fist, then smiled broadly. Pointing both arms in front of him, a magic circle formed, from which a black-red orb began to spiral out at high speed, seemingly attracting everything with its powerful winds. It emitted small, magical, spiraling lights of the same hue as the orb, while the latter increased in size as time passed. By the time the explosion ended, leaving only gigantic clouds of red smoke, Naruto already had a sphere of colossal size. "Consume it all," Naruto murmured with a wide, dark grin. The gigantic sphere took off like a comet, spiraling out like lightning, followed by the beam of energy as it traveled at a completely terrifying speed. The dark-haired man uncrossed his arms, only to open his eyes wide as soon as he saw the sphere in front of him. "I hate that Gremory kid," he said before he was completely swept away by the attack. After traveling a great distance, the sphere crashed into some plains. The orb detonated shortly after, releasing a gigantic magical wave that seemed to increase in size to tens of kilometers, before beginning to spiral outward, absorbing all the energy released by the explosion. The dark-haired man, in the midst of the attack, managed to get away as soon as the magic wave was released, only to have to prevent himself from being sucked in by the attack. What the hell is this? His wide eyes observed what appeared to be a reddish-black hole that, with each passing moment, increased in size along with the gravitational force. Every rock that even slightly touched the portal was reduced to nothing but red particles. He watched with a slight shock as the mountains trembled before shaking and being dragged across the ground, straight into that hole. "Hey, just let yourself be carried away, it feels amazing," said Naruto from the sky, a few meters above the black-haired man. He gave him an angry look, because of how cool the redhead looked. "You better get down, you damn kid. Hey, I'll break every bone in your body before I gouge out your eyes and use your skull as a cup." The dark-haired man yelled, his eyes staring at him intensely. Naruto chuckled softly. "Why don't you go up there? It's a waste of energy going down when you're the one trying to attack me." His eyes expressed murderous intentions that only led Naruto to smile with apparent amusement at his anger. "Here's a present," said Naruto, pointing his index finger at her, on which a small blackish-red orb began to form, emitting magic of the same spiraling tone. "Enjoy the zero." Releasing his attack, a gigantic beam of energy shot out, its size covering tens of meters. The dark-haired man's eyes reflected the powerful attack, before he clenched his teeth, covering himself in darkness, in a completely black sphere with purple tones. "Darkness will consume him, my defense is impenetrable," the dark-haired man thought, smiling with clear fury in his eyes. Naruto, from the air, merely raised an eyebrow and then smiled predatorily. Before his eyes, the beam of energy seemed to split in two, due to the sphere that completely enveloped the dark-haired man. On either side, the ground seemed to turn black before beginning to sink, as if it were being crushed by a great weight, but without actually cracking, it was more as if it were melting into nothingness. Shortly afterwards, the ground glowed crimson as if it were a light show. That was before a powerful explosion took place, completely covering a huge radius of almost 3 kilometers. The smoke and dust didn't last even a second, before being drawn into the hole which continued to suck everything in, except the redhead, seemingly unaffected by the gravitational forces of the hole. "Well, I guess you're weakened or something." Naruto spoke, beginning to create a spear in his hand, which was formed from small black particles with a crimson outline. The black sphere began to crack, before it shattered like glass, freeing the winged demon who only frowned. His breathing was a little heavy and the sweat that ran down his forehead dripped to the ground. "Now you understand, child, if this were my true power, you wouldn't have the slightest chance of surviving," he said somewhat arrogantly as he raised a hand, creating a small dark arrow. Retracting his arm with his spear, his enemy copied his action with his arrow, and then both enemies launched their attacks, which produced a loud crash on impact. Neither side yielded ground, and while it seemed a stalemate, the attacks began to be affected. The arrow began to dissolve into red particles, while the spear, for its part, turned dark with purple tones, abruptly appearing to be sucked into pure darkness until it vanished. If you're in a weak state because of the tower, I'm weak because of the damn curse, Naruto replied, finding himself surrounded by his magical aura which a moment later exploded, expanding for dozens of meters around him. Remaining like that for a few seconds, his aura seemed to disperse into small particles in the environment. Planting his feet on the ground, parts of the ground began to detach and be sucked into the hole, which managed to pull out a mountain in half, before all the ground likewise broke and large pieces of rock were taken towards that portal or hole. What the hell did you do, you damn kid? He gave the redhead an expression of total anger at his current situation. Naruto shrugged. It's just magic, nothing too shocking. That response sent the winged demon into a fit of furious screams, curses at the redhead, and a middle finger before the ground beneath him cracked open and he began to be pulled into that hole that only erased everything on contact. In his hand, a sphere of darkness was created that gave off small purple sparks, before he pointed at the redhead and unleashed his attack, letting him travel like a comet without being affected by the gravitational suction forces in the environment. I won't leave without leaving you with a scar. Naruto brushed the imaginary dust off his shoulder. Something that's very hard to believe. Just centimeters from hitting Naruto's face, the sphere began to disperse into small reddish orbs that disappeared shortly after. Oh, it worked, Naruto murmured, a hand on his chin. A smile spread across his lips before he chuckled. Even your darkness can be erased, hee. I can't wait to see what happens when I'm at my full power. The yellow-eyed demon gave him a shocked look, stunned by what his eyes had witnessed. That was impossible, his darkness couldn't be destroyed or erased. It was supposed to absorb everything before reducing it to nothing. Have a peaceful journey, Naruto said, catching the attention of the demon who could only frown. This isn't over. Did you hear that? It's not over. Gremory kid. With one last scream of fury, his body glowed in dark, purple hues before dissolving into particles that vanished into the atmosphere. I'll wait for the moment we meet again. It'll be much more fun to have a fight where I can use my full power. Naruto let out a small laugh, then made the blackish-red hole disappear with a snap of his fingers, leaving a small trail of crimson magic. Naruto crossed his arms, his eyes gleaming slightly at the destruction he'd caused. This was nothing. He almost destroyed the world, then nearly wiped it out with his attack, warped the land so badly that it caused the continents of this world to begin splitting apart. And he still has the nerve to say it's nothing. Gremory said with her arms crossed, giving the redhead a reproachful look as a cold expression settled over her face. Naruto waved him off as if it were nothing. The world isn't destroyed, and the continents being a little separated isn't so bad. Gremory only let out a sigh before slowly descending to the ground, followed by the redhead who only had an amused look. Naruto-sama. Aino approached the redhead from behind, hugging him with a wide smile. Can we continue where we left off? She asked, rubbing a finger against his chest. Naruto smiled slightly. Sorry to burst your bubble, but right now I need to play with a certain hybrid before I empty his treasury. Aino pouted, puffing out her cheeks, and turned her face away with a HMP. Don't get like that, we can continue when I'm done, Naruto said before freeing himself from the black-haired girl's grip and then starting to walk in the direction of where he had left the dragon demon hybrid. Aino quickly joined him with a happy smile. Gremory, with a small twitch in her eyebrow, followed the duo from behind. \W /W 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 From magical energy, a blackish-red mass of pure magic fluttered in his hands before shaking violently and then exploding a second later. Pursing her lips, she couldn't help but grimace. I don't understand how my brother could do it so easily. Rias, with an annoyed expression, said, more magic beginning to gather in her palms. It's because her control over her magic is far superior. Shaping the pod isn't so simple, controlling destruction in its entirety is incredibly complicated. Venolana said, walking behind her daughter with a curious look as she watched her train. I never would have seen that coming from her daughter, from Naruto yes, but from Rias? Obviously not. The redhead was taken by surprise, causing her control over her magic to falter, which made it scatter into the air. Mother, don't scare me, Rias said with a small frown. She was too focused on her thoughts to have noticed her mother's presence. She laughed, a hand to her lips. That wasn't my intention, dear. But if you're going to start training, why didn't you come and see me? I could give you some advice and a little help." Rias looked away, embarrassed. "I didn't think about it," she said softly, almost in a whisper. Venelana approached her daughter and placed her hands on the redhead's shoulders. "Come on, I'll make you a powerful woman." Rias didn't know the reason, but suddenly she felt a chill when she heard the sweet voice with which her mother addressed her. "Mother, because I feel like your training won't be that enjoyable," Rias said, a drop of sweat sliding down her cheek. "Fufu, don't worry Rias, dear, we'll have a little correction for your rude behavior towards little Ravel," Venelana replied with a big, sweet smile and her eyes closed. Swallowing hard, Rias felt a deep fear. Her feet couldn't prevent her from being dragged by her mother, leaving a mark on the ground. "Walk properly, Rias, or I'll correct your behavior further." What her mother said immediately made her start moving, trembling a little with fear. /W 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 /W/. Whistling a simple tune, Naruto found himself walking with his hands behind his back. The enormous hallway he was walking through was filled with very valuable paintings and artwork. The redhead cared very little about that, he had already emptied the hybrid's treasury. Although he could have even brought about the end for humans in this dimension and taken away all their riches, he did not do so for one simple reason. He already had enough, even his home was overflowing with wealth, and now that only increased after taking his beloved treasures from that hybrid. Incidentally, he only left him with none of the treasures for that, it was his small reward for the victory. That fool complained, almost crying about losing the treasures that took him hundreds of thousands of centuries to gather. "Monster, you have no heart, how could you leave my beautiful and precious treasures so empty?" said the hybrid in a fetal position. "Those treasures took him most of his time without rest, only to be stolen all in a single day." "What a crybaby," Naruto mocked before simply kicking the demon in the back. Crash! Passing through a dozen walls in the gigantic castle, the green-haired boy ended up hundreds of meters away from the place. "Naruto-sama," Aino said from behind the redhead with a small smile and a tiny blush. "His violent impulses are going to get out of control," Gremory said with a serious yet cold expression. Naruto waved his hand without breaking stride. "Calm down, that wasn't anything violent. I barely touched him, and it was only with a tiny fraction of my strength. Besides, he's very durable, I don't think he'll end up dead from a simple caress." "Right, I forgot one small detail," said Naruto before snapping his fingers, forming a black-reddish portal beside him, from which a certain green-haired hybrid emerged in the same fetal position. "Hey Broccoli, open the door to go up to the next floor," Naruto said, kicking the dragon hybrid a little in the side. "What makes you think I can open a door?" The green-haired demon stood up, frowning as he stared into Naruto's red eyes. The redhead, for his part, smiled sinisterly. "Oh, I don't know. Perhaps because all the guardians are somehow connected to the tower, or perhaps because when a guardian is eliminated, the door to the next floor opens." The green-haired man grunted. "That's just a hypothesis." Naruto shrugged. "You guys function sort of like a key. But if you don't want to open the entrance, I just have to erase you. I didn't want to get my hands dirty, that's why I asked you to open the door. If you want to die so badly, who am I to refuse?" He raised his palm, forming an orb of destruction from magical particles. The hybrid shook his hands with a fearful look. "Come on, we don't have to go that far. It's true, we can open the door to the next floor, but it has the drawback of draining all our magic and weakening us." Naruto turned off the orb, and with a flick of his wrist, a red pill formed. "I can replenish your magic with this pill. I'll just infuse it with magic, and you'll consume it, restoring your magic. I don't think you have that much to begin with." The green-haired boy clicked his tongue angrily. "Whatever, you damn kid. Just get out of here, and I hope you die before you hit the upper floors." He muttered that last part as he waved his hands in circular motions, and before his eyes, a door began to appear from the floor, as if it were being summoned. Naruto grinned. "All right, girls. Let's go for more excitement." He raised his hand in a childish fist as he walked toward the door, opening it before entering. At least it wasn't more violent. Gremory murmured as she walked in. Aino smiled. Ufufu, I would have loved that. She also entered through the door, which closed behind her. The hybrid simply slumped down, completely exhausted, with no magic left and no energy left to even sit. But he had to move his hand toward the floating pill, and with some disgust, he put it in his mouth to begin digesting it with a grimace. Suddenly her eyes widened slightly. That brat, he wasn't joking. Her body was covered by a thin layer of magic as she laughed, feeling her reserves refill. Pro let out a grunt. Damn. That's too much. His eyes were wide with the implication that brat had way too much magic, and with a pill he created based on his magic, not only did he get his magic back, but it was far more than he thought possible and more than his body could handle. I'm going to explode. \W \\\W W \W Note for the future, never train with mom. Rias grimaced, looking at her left side covered in minor burns. Her clothes were full of holes and looked like mere rags, her hair was matted with dirt, and sweat dripped from her body. Her legs trembled from the effort of standing. Her hands felt numb, she couldn't feel them, and she didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, good because she didn't feel the excruciating pain, or bad because she couldn't move them. Oh, Rias, my dear, you still have a lot of training and preparation to do. Venelana smiled sweetly, sending a shiver down the redhead's spine. Mother, there's no need to train anymore. I'm more prepared now. Rias said urgently, she didn't want to continue with this torture. Had she known, she never would have started training near her mother. Venelana shook her head. No, my child, it's still not enough. I'm going to die, if not from torture, then from exhaustion. \W W W W The following floors weren't much of a challenge for the redhead, who was excitedly expecting something more exciting. He didn't find it. Sure, the next guardians were stronger, but nothing compared to the one he'd faced on the previous floor. That raven-haired, dark-haired man was stronger than these, even in his weakened state. Well, except for the last one he faced, that one was roughly twice as powerful as the winged demon. I'm getting bored. Naruto thought with his hands in the pockets of his black pants. A smile slowly spread across his lips. If the guardians up to the 10th floor weren't that powerful, then he would simply go floor by floor, quickly eliminating them until he found the dark-haired man to continue their battle. He's already recovering. Naruto said, clenching his fist, which was covered in pod. \W W W W As he saw it, it became so strong that the subsequent demons weren't as powerful as he had initially thought. So, as planned, he continued onward, reaching the guardian, erasing it with a single movement, and moving forward. The worlds of the floors were curious, to say the least. They weren't anything special, they looked like human worlds with their rulers in the form of guardians. It wasn't until the 19th floor that things got interesting, as it took him a bit of effort to take down that guardian. Now I was here, on the 20th floor world, a planet filled with dark rocks, mountains, and volcanoes that seemed to be active. The sky was completely black, with gray clouds drifting through the air. He looked curiously at what appeared to be a purple moon with black touches. Finally you show up, you damned Gremory boy. The dark and cold voice came from the same winged type who floated in the sky with his wings flapping as he gave him a cold and murderous look with those yellow eyes. Well, I didn't want to leave our fight unresolved. Naruto said, disappearing and reappearing in the air a few meters in front of the black-haired man. Down below, on the ground, Aino simply placed a finger on her chin. Looks like we need to keep our distance, Graphia. Naruto-sama will lose control again. The silver-haired woman frowned. It seems so. Both flew away on their wings, moving off to watch the fight from a distance. My darkness will consume your entire being. The dark-haired man was enveloped by his magical aura. Naruto followed suit with a smile. And my destruction will erase you from existence. Their blurred figures collided with force, producing a massive magical shockwave and furious winds. A powerful kick was stopped by his opponent's forearm as he moved his hand into a fist, aiming for his enemy's cheek. The dark-haired man tilted his head, letting the blow pass while he also counterattacked with a powerful punch straight to the redhead's stomach, who only deflected his attack by pushing his wrist while violently turning to impact a powerful knee strike to his arms that he had crossed in an X to cover himself from the blow. The collision sent him reeling back several feet with its force as he lunged toward the redhead, a dark sphere in his palm. Their forearms collided as he aimed the dark sphere directly at the redhead's face, before a powerful beam of energy shot out. Naruto laughed before tilting his head, then leaning forward and delivering a diagonal, downward kick to his enemy's shoulder. The raven-haired man's angry gaze turned colder as he braced his forearm against the kick. Using his other foot, Naruto unleashed a forward heel kick, striking the knee of the raven-haired man who had raised his leg to intercept the blow. Breaking free with a spin, the redhead connected with a spinning heel kick against the raven-haired man's arms, sending him flying only a few feet before he flicked his wrists and thrust both palms forward. A beam of darkness shot from his hands with thunderous speed. Naruto merely clutched the right sleeve of his shirt with his gloved hand, seemingly adjusting his garment. The powerful beams of darkness struck the redhead, or rather, a kind of translucent black-crimson barrier surrounding him. The rays of darkness split, passing harmlessly to the sides, while those that had impacted the barrier were erased into red particles that floated for a second in the air before simply vanishing. When the attack stopped, Naruto smiled. "My turn." With a twist of his wrist, several crimson rays surrounded his limb before he pushed his fingers forward, opening his palm so that a large magic circle abruptly began to spiral into one another with the Gremory crest in the middle. Clenching his hand into a fist, a massive beam of energy shot from the pod, magic circle, quickly covering the distance. The dark-haired man surrounded himself with wings that emitted flashes of purple magic, before a large sphere of darkness enveloped him. The attack seemed to consume the entire sphere before a huge explosion erupted, covering everything in smoke as red as blood. "I haven't finished that form yet," Naruto thought with an inward grimace. He shook his head, banishing his thought to having to bend his body out of a powerful axe kick that stirred the winds, before twisting his hip and throwing a punch at his enemy's exposed side. The dark-haired man lowered his forearm, shielding himself from the blow, only to grimace slightly at the force that blew him away with a great wave of wind. "He's stronger than before," the dark-haired man thought, stroking his injured limb as he twisted his shoulder until he heard it crack. "The magic won't work," they both thought, staring at each other. A wide smile spread across the redhead's lips. Not a second later, he had already launched himself, appearing in front of the black-haired man who grabbed Naruto's wrist and pulled it to his side, deflecting the blow. Then he had to raise his knee to defend himself from a kick to his left side, before another knee strike reached his chest, which he stopped with his other hand by grabbing the redhead by his joint. The dark-haired boy moved his right knee toward the elbow of the arm he was holding, but Naruto stopped the blow by grabbing his joint. They stared at each other before pushing each other away, then disappeared in two blurs, purple and crimson. They circled the skies, colliding with great waves of wind that erupted with each impact. Both spun like tops before the purple blur hurtled toward the ground at high speed, crashing into a deep crater that only raised a cloud of dust. From the dust, the blur emerged unaffected. In the air, they continued colliding and moving further and further apart, their speed increasing. On its journey through the air, the crimson blur ended up crashing into a mountain, which was reduced to dust with a powerful roar, before the purple blur appeared behind the crimson blur to impact it, causing the crimson blur to shoot towards the ground, leaving a great trail of destruction. The purple blur was soon in front of the crimson blur to proceed with another blow, which was dodged by the crimson blur, which only positioned itself behind it to strike it, burying it in the ground, which expanded into a gigantic crater while the rocks rose up due to the impact. Naruto grinned before continuing forward with incredible speed, preparing a punch that was blocked by his opponent's crossed arms. The large crater widened further from the impact. The dark-haired man delivered a swift headbutt to the redhead, sending him flying. The winged demon then stood up with a quick spin, before launching himself forward with his left fist, connecting with the redhead's abdomen. The redhead went flying, but not before hitting the dark-haired man on the cheek with his right fist. The winged demon slammed into the ground, leaving a massive mark, while the redhead was sent flying a great distance. Both enemies quickly resumed their attack, Naruto descending at incredible speed while the dark-haired demon launched himself into the sky, his wings flapping. Boom! His right fist connected with his opponent's right fist. Naruto turned his hip and then sent a kick towards his opponent's left side, who grabbed his leg with his left hand. Naruto lowered his left hand into a fist, which passed by the right side of the dark-haired man, who had only tilted his head to his left. Naruto swiftly moved his hand, using the momentum to deliver a karate chop to the dark-haired man's neck, sending him flying several meters through the air. Having to catch a foot with his hands, Naruto smiled and took advantage of the fact that the black-haired man had become slightly unbalanced, to grab him by the ankle and squeeze him tightly before spinning at high speeds on his axis. They spun like a crimson top, dark from the speed at which they were moving. After several turns, Naruto released his enemy's foot, which ended up crashing into a distant mountain, piercing it from side to side, before falling hard to the ground in a large trench made by his body. The redhead was already waiting for him at the other end, and with his right foot he kicked the winged demon in the head, who only returned the way he came, crossing the mountain again, but several meters above the first hole. Shaking his head, the dark-haired man composed himself to block with his palm a powerful punch that left his limb trembling, before a hook towards his abdomen made him block with his knee, causing a loud crash from the impact. Moving his other hand into a fist, he threw a jab towards his enemy's chin, who only pushed his limbs away, then sent a powerful quick punch to his chest, which he blocked with his forearm, being thrown several meters by the force of the blow while several rings of wind appeared behind him. The dark-haired man threw a kick as he turned his hip slightly, connecting with the right palm of the redhead who had stopped him, before he moved his other hand to grab him by the wrist and pull him forcefully towards him to deliver a knee strike to his stomach with his left limb that knocked the wind out of him with several drops of saliva. A hook to his chin left him staring at the dark sky, then a powerful kick to his left cheek sent him flying towards the ground, spinning several times from the force before flapping his wings and recovering in the air, only to have to bend his body out of a downward kick, so that he could then launch himself towards the blonde with his fist retracting to send it towards the ribs of the redhead, who only caught his blow by the wrist before throwing his own fist towards his chest. Copying his enemy's action, the winged demon grabbed the redhead's wrist, his arms crossed as he tried to trap the other's limb. Naruto forcefully shoved him toward him, then struck his chin with a knee strike that sent him flying several meters. Naruto blurred due to the high speeds, throwing a punch with his left fist that was stopped by his opponent's palm. The redhead growled as he was pulled toward the black-haired man, who delivered a right knee to his abdomen before landing a right hook to his chin, sending him flying into the clouds in a mere blur. Stopping with a grimace, the redhead saw the demon appear before him with scratches on his face and traces of dirt on his clothes. The redhead was the same, with small marks on his face and dirty clothes. "Not bad, Gremory boy," the winged demon said, dusting off his clothes. "Same here," Naruto replied, copying her action before getting into a fighting stance. "Entertain me, I'm wondering the same." Swoosh. Boom. End of chapter. Chapter 11. Walking among enormous craters, immense holes, and terrain with lava like flowing lakes, stood Naruto, his right hand clutching his left shoulder. His clothes were torn to shreds, and he only had his ripped pants left, so torn they resembled shorts. His right eye was closed, with a trickle of blood running from his forehead down his right cheek. A trail of dripping blood ran from his nose to the floor. Stepping on the lava, his face showed no signs of pain or discomfort from the intense heat. Naruto stopped a few meters from an arm sticking out of a crater and let out a mocking laugh. The crimson eye showed an amused gleam. "You were stronger than I imagined," he said before continuing on and passing by the crater. He had finally finished off that demon. It was tougher than he thought, and he almost died twice. In fact, the world itself nearly self-destructed, releasing immense amounts of lava that covered more than half of it. Had it not been for the end of the fight, the world would have exploded from the shock waves and all the destruction caused. "I must move forward." Naruto let out a breath as he smiled slightly. Now he was alone, completely alone in a tower infested with bloodthirsty demons that would kill him on sight. From what he observed, while the demons possessed the power and magical reserves to put even his older brother to shame, they lacked fighting experience and movement. It was as if they fought on instinct, like a rabid animal, without any technique, just a furious, animalistic style. Just like him, if they asked him, but at least he compensated by learning from his own mistakes. "I suppose I should have said goodbye to them in a kinder way," The redhead stopped in his tracks to look up at the sky with a slight hint of sadness in his red eyes. His fight lasted for days, perhaps weeks, without stopping at all. And thinking of his companions, he took a brief respite by replacing himself with a clone, using a large portion of his magic to have time to speak with Grafia and Aino. He didn't want them to accompany him on his journey, and while it might have seemed as if he were disrespecting them because of the way he spoke to them, it was actually more out of concern and for a reason hidden from Aino. He had explained it to her privately, and the dark-haired girl accepted his order after much persuasion and a few promises, as long as she did as he said. For Grafia it was different. He had to talk and convince her to leave the place, inform his parents that he was alive and well, and when she was finished she could return. There was a minor conflict due to his lack of time and the fact that he needed her to leave right then and there, so it was no surprise that he ended up saying a few less than pleasant things, not insulting, but definitely annoyed by the way he had noticed the slight twitch in the silver-haired maid's eyebrows. And in the end he was able to get his much-desired alone time to strengthen himself without interfering in his fight. It gave him an annoying feeling not having them, since he was used to the presence of both of them all this time. Now I'm alone, shit, I'm going to go crazy, Naruto whispered with a grimace, before simply looking ahead and continuing to move forward. He would think about it later, for now, he would recover from his injuries. \W \\\W \W W \\\W. Grafia sighed as she watched the matriarch of the Bale clan sob with joy at finally having news of her baby, although deep down she was a little annoyed at not having been able to bring him back from that horrible place. And the things he said to make him leave didn't help, if she was honest, if it weren't for the fact that he was in a dangerous place, in a fight, and if it weren't for the fact that he was a noble demon of such high status, she was sure she would have slapped him across the face. It was obvious, that fool wasn't going to die so easily. Rias crossed her arms in annoyance, huffing and looking away. All to hide the worried and obsessive glint in her green eyes. By the way, Grafia, why didn't you bring my bratty son back? Zeoticus asked, raising an eyebrow. He knew his son well, his stubbornness was such that he wouldn't give up on anything to get what he wanted. And if he was right, he had pressured and harassed Lucifuge into returning without him. Grafia's eyebrow twitched. The young master was discourteous and ordered me to return to report on his condition. I see. The Gremory could only nod. You'll be back, I suppose. The silver-haired woman nodded. It's my duty. I only came back to report. I have to return and make sense of things to the young master. Zeoticus sighed. Wait, my baby, does he eat well? Does he take care of himself, keep himself clean? Has he hurt himself? Venelana asked, staring intently at Grafia as the latter backed away from having the brunette right in her face. Well, he keeps himself clean and eats well, and he hasn't been seriously injured, Grafia said with a serious expression. Aside from losing his arm once, there were no other injuries that seemed life-threatening enough to put him close to death. Venelana let out a sigh of relief. That's good. That young man has a lot to explain. These past 6 months have been difficult without him, many things have happened. The Gremory matriarch rambled, her gaze drifting away from the maid's shocked expression. What? Almost 3 years passed in that tower, but only 6 months have passed outside. His brows furrowed. Time might work differently in each dimension, too. A crazy thought crossed his mind. What if, on one of those floors, a second here would make a year pass there? He shook his head, dismissing the idea. Nothing like that could happen. Yes, that theory was crazy. \W \W W \W Die already, you filthy bastard. A humanoid being with a completely black body roared with hatred. Curved horns were perched on its forehead while 2 enormous bat wings protruded from its back. A Naruto wearing a red outfit smiled as his red hair swayed in the wind. His eyes fell upon the demon flying at high speed in his direction. Unfazed by the terrifying speed or the great amount of energy that could be felt in the environment, the redhead laughed, much to the demon's dismay. Thanks to you, I got used to using my power better, Naruto said as he dodged an attack. In a matter of microseconds, he delivered a powerful kick to the abdomen, before unleashing a knee strike to the chin that sent him flying at sonic speeds. Although it's annoying to be cursed and unable to use elemental magic, I can't complain entirely. Swoosh! The wind in front of the redhead took the shape of a cone as several air rings formed, creating a series of stairs. Pain is gain, and gain is power. Boom! Unleashing a torrential attack from his pod, which engulfed a large portion of the demon's body and completely obliterated a mountain range. A red light appeared for brief periods before an explosion erupted. A red mushroom cloud spread out, rapidly covering kilometers in just a few seconds. The center of the cloud glowed with a bloody, dangerous red. So, once again, a boring fight is over, Naruto muttered as the cloud crashed into a translucent crimson barrier that destroyed everything within centimeters of touching it. The seconds ticked by, and when the great explosion ended and the mushroom cloud dispersed, Naruto could see the enormous crater of titanic proportions. Next floor. Naruto stepped down to the ground, the air flapping his red trench coat as he touched the floor softly and began to move at a slow pace toward the door that had formed where that guardian demon was supposed to be. Upon arriving, he didn't give a second glance to the demon's completely charred body and simply opened the door, crossing it with his face showing total boredom. Maybe I should have kept Graphia, that way I wouldn't die of boredom. \W \\\W W W /\W Graphia sneezed, worrying those present. Graphia, are you okay? You're not getting sick, are you? Venolana asked, looking at the silver-haired girl who had a confused expression. I don't think so, Lady Gremory. Perhaps someone is thinking about me, or talking about whatever the case may be, Graphia replied dismissively. Venolana stared at her for a moment before shrugging. Well, now for more magical projections of my baby. The brunette's expression shifted to one of excitement at the prospect of seeing magical projections of her baby. They worked just like photographs, but could be projected magically and stored until, if desired, a physical photograph could be taken to keep. Okay. I have one where he was asleep. Graphia projected the image of the redhead through a magic circle as Venolana shrieked. Rias stood to one side, arms crossed, though she kept glancing at the projection, a deep blush spreading across her face. Her eyes held a glint of longing and obsession. I've arrived. I want to see my Naruton. A happy Surzex appeared in a red blur as he looked around excitedly, searching for his beloved younger brother. Lord Lucifer, your behavior. Graphia, oh, shit. Surzex looked absolutely terrified at the sight of the newcomer. One is enough, but two. That's terrifying. \W \W W W W Ha ha ha, your head is a good ball. Naruto laughed loudly as he kicked a demon head with several bones around the skull, forming a sort of crown. This place is so much fun. Naruto exclaimed, opening his arms wide as he spun around. All around him were thousands of dismembered bodies with their organs hanging out, exposing them as rivers of red blood flowed beneath his feet, which were covered by his black boots. You're a monster. Naruto heard a demonic whisper, filled with a sense of dread. Stopping, he turned and stared at the body, severed at the hip, of what appeared to be a demon, judging by the crimson hue of its skin. I don't think so, I'm just an ordinary demon, he replied as he advanced and stood before the body, his own shadow covering the demon on the ground. And I had a little fun. Finishing his sentence, he mercilessly stomped on the head, shattering it in a shower of blood that stained his pants and boots. \W \W W W W If I pray, will I faint from grief so I don't have to witness the next disaster? Surzex was in a dilemma as he watched two silver-haired women gaze at each other with a strange gleam in their eyes. Yes, praying and winning a fainting spell's so good. \W W W W W slash. Oh, it's interesting that a demon could get here. A woman with white hair and blood-red eyes with a slit in each pupil watched the redhead in front of her. Naruto smiled, taking in the pointed ears that would undoubtedly make anyone mistake her for an elf. I must say it's interesting to find a vampire in this place teeming with demons. It's also better that you're a progenitor, a powerful one. The woman smiled as she rested her face in her palm. You're becoming more interesting. Alice von Ataraxia. Who told you that name? The albino girl earned a cold stare. Demonic wings sprouted from her back as she uncrossed her legs and stood up, her tight black gothic dress immediately attracting the Gremory's gaze. Just an ordinary man, Naruto replied, glancing into those red eyes that immediately made him smile. Those eyes had a sparkle that, to Naruto, made the vampire even more attractive. Because of some random man, I must tear off every limb of yours. Has anyone ever told you you're beautiful? Naruto smiled. He loved that killer look in her eyes. He was getting aroused, and he didn't fully understand why, but he knew it was because of her beauty. Those eyes, that slender, curvy body covered by that tight dress didn't do much to hide the wonder of her figure. The blonde woman raised an eyebrow. Are you out of your mind? Naruto laughed. I honestly don't know. But I'm liking that look. Whoosh. With a big smile, Naruto dodged a blood-red spear, which easily broke the sound barrier and left a huge hole where it had been standing. Then it will make you feel good to know that I will cut off your limbs and keep you as my food for all eternity. The vampire inhaled for a few seconds before laughing softly. Yes, that scent you give off is exquisite and addictive. I'm glad to hear it. Naruto exclaimed, having moved at supersonic speeds, hitting the ground where the vampire had been, who was now floating with the help of her wings. In the impact zone, a deep crater of almost 20 meters was formed. So it was true. Now the worlds are magically reinforced. The force required to damage the world is several times greater than on the previous floors. Naruto smiled. That meant he could stop holding back. The world wouldn't be destroyed so easily now. What's your name, you little demon? Naruto dodged a pair of red hands that nearly grabbed him. Naruto Gremory. Swoosh. Good. You already know my name, but it's a formality to introduce myself. I am Alice von Ataraxia, progenitor of vampires. Alice introduced herself while holding a spear in her hands, which she was using to try to impale the redhead, who stopped the weapon with his left hand, without much effort from what he could see. And I must put you in your place for interfering with my rest time. Alice spoke as she bent her body and sent a right kick in the direction of Gremory's ribs. I'd love to see you try. Naruto replied as he caught the albino's foot with his right hand, only to deflect the spear and leave an opening which he used to send a punch towards Alice's stomach. You're very fast for a young demon. Alice said as she landed behind the redhead, having dodged that attack which only sent furious winds throughout the throne room. You're no slouch yourself. Naruto replied as he turned to face the mother, who just smiled, showing her sharp fangs. I'm going to enjoy you a lot. I'd love for you to do it. Naruto replied with a dark smile, his red locks casting a shadow on his forehead and eyes, making them look demonic. Alice just chuckled softly as she stood face to face with the redhead, almost feeling his breath. You're far too young to even attempt what you're thinking. It's fun. Alice smiled wider, her eyes gleaming a sinister red. Show me you mean business, kid. Naruto's eyebrow twitched, but he managed a crooked smile. Oh, you don't need to say it twice. From the outside, the sky was blue with drifting white clouds. In the center of what appeared to be a vast kingdom, a colossal castle of titanic proportions could be seen. It seemed to touch the clouds, so immense was its size, and it appeared to encompass more than half of a town. Boom! Well, that castle was now reduced to rubble by a huge explosion that completely destroyed it. At the center of it all was Naruto with a big smile, while in front of him was an albino girl who was very, very angry because of the expression on his face. You have destroyed my castle. Collateral damage, Naruto replied, shrugging dismissively. Alice took a deep breath, calming herself, and looked coldly at Gremory. You're dead. With those words, everything went to shit. \W \\\W W \\\W He seems to be nowhere to be found. I can't sense his presence anywhere either. Graphia murmured, looking at the almost destroyed world of the 20th floor. Apparently, the redhead hadn't been gone for very long. She sighed as her wings spread. Taking flight, she moved at great speeds, heading towards the magical trail she could sense. \W /\W /W What are you doing here, Akino? Rias crossed her arms beneath her large bust for her age, emphasizing it more with her action. Just doing what Naruto-sama ordered me to do. Akino laughed with an amused look. And that would be it? Sona asked, adjusting her glasses and looking seriously at her friend's piece. It's a secret. Akino smiled with amusement at the lapse in the Citrieris's expression and the twitch in Rias's eyebrow. Akino. Rias spoke with a clear tone of annoyance in her voice. Akino smiled as she shook her head. It's just a joke. Heavens, you're such a grouch, she said, much to Rias's obvious annoyance and anger. Fine, he sent me to look after his little sister who can't take care of herself. Akino replied, obviously lying, but Rias didn't need to know the true intention behind her king sending her to Kuoh. Rias puffed out her cheeks, averting her gaze and crossing her arms as pink powder covered her puffed-out cheeks. Is that all? Sona asked, not buying what Akino said. She knew that, while it might seem like Naruto cared about his sister, she was sure he'd grown tired of her treatment of him. In reality, she was certain he had other intentions in sending his bishop specifically to this city. She couldn't know what was going through her friend's mind. He was unpredictable and complicated. Akino smiled mysteriously. Naruto-sama also said that he's too smart for his own good, Sona-sama. Sona slowly closed her eyes, trying to hide the slight blush on her cheeks. She was right, but that annoying friend of hers seemed to have already known she'd notice immediately. Yes, it was only for that reason, and so that she would have a place to return to after her trip, Akino replied with cold eyes. I don't need anyone to take care of me. I can do it myself. Rias scoffed, frowning. That's not what Naruto-sama told me. Well, it's the truth. My brother is a fool. Which one of the two? Sona asked with a raised eyebrow, finding her friend's anger somewhat amusing. Gremory's face turned red with shame and fury. Ag. Both of you. \W /\W /W 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 Sirzek sneezed, and the stack of papers in his office went flying. The redhead, seeing the unsigned papers lying around, comically sobbed over all the paperwork he was missing, which worsened when he noticed a new pile of papers seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Lord Lucifer, I hope you are not thinking of neglecting your duty. A female voice with a cold and serious tone stopped the Mao from trying to destroy every paper. And no, of course not. I was just remembering things from the past. The redhead laughed nervously. Damn, they almost look like twin sisters. If it weren't for their hair, they'd pass for twins. \W /\W /W 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 A deep crater formed as a white blur crashed into the ground, which shook from the impact. In the center of the damaged area stood Alice, slowly rising with a grimace on her face. Her dress was torn in several places and she was missing her left sleeve, while she had minor injuries on her legs, as well as bruises on her body that were hidden by her dress, which were healing quickly. Swoosh! Leaping back, Alice watched as a red stain deepened the crater and increased its size to terrifying proportions. In the middle of the impact zone stood a grinning Naruto, his right foot planted firmly in the ground, indicating he had delivered a powerful kick. The redhead's red suit was torn in several places, as were his trousers, and the bottom of his trench coat was cut and damaged. His smiling face had small, healing cuts, and his shirt showed wounds visible through the holes. Cracking his neck, Naruto let out a sigh. Not bad, you're stronger than I thought. Alice growled, baring her sharp fangs with an angry hiss. I'll make you pay for what you've done. Naruto smiled with amusement. I told you before. It's collateral damage, he said as he watched Alice's eyes dart around, looking with great disgust at the immense craters that now filled the place. Where her castle once stood, there was now a deep, burnt-out crater. I will kill you, the vampire whispered with clear anger. Try it, Naruto murmured near the albino girl's ear, who widened her eyes, but didn't have time to do anything before she was flung away like a rag doll. Spinning in the air, the mother spun around several times before her body reduced an entire mountain to rubble, which then collapsed on top of her, burying her completely. A fraction of a second later, debris flew out in a burst of red energy. Alice emerged, her fury fixed solely on the grinning redhead. You're testing my patience. Alice blurred, moving at great speeds as her body seemed to catch fire from the great speed at which she was moving. Beneath her was a small trail of fire. I love doing it. Biom. A roar echoed around the world, a powerful shock wave was felt across the globe, while a gust of wind cleared clouds for miles in diameter. In the midst of the deep clash was Naruto with his right fist striking Alice's right fist. Separating himself, Naruto opened his palms, which glowed crimson. In a short time, 2 red spears formed, one in each hand, their outlines entirely black. Alice formed several spears from red particles. Her gaze fixed on the Gremory seemed to grow darker. This is just an experiment, don't feel bad if everything goes to shit, I still don't have it that well under control, Naruto said as he sent both spears flying towards Alice in a violent and ferocious spin on his own axis. You're so hateful, Alice said, moving the middle and index fingers of her right hand downwards. With the signal given, the large number of spears traveled at dizzying speeds, easily exceeding sonic speeds. In what seemed like an instant, the 2 attacks collided, and when they did, nothing seemed to happen. That was until a blinding flash that spanned half the globe appeared. Shortly after, a massive reddish-black dome began to expand for tens of kilometers every few milliseconds. You're crazy. You're going to destroy the world. Alice shouted angrily. Of course not. Naruto opened his arms with an amused smile. I'm just testing out a new attack. Inevitably, both were touched by the dome, which made Alice growl in anger. Destroy everything, cursed spear, Naruto whispered, which seemed to create a domino effect as the dome immediately contracted into a floating sphere, before taking on a spear shape and beginning to tremble. In a split second, the spear released so much magical energy that it was suffocating, and in the next instant, the spear turned a chilling black. When the color changed completely, the attack detonated, covering a quarter of the world in mere microseconds. A simple black stain almost completely obscured a world more than 4 times the size of Earth. The next moment the stain vanished, and with it that entire part of the world, leaving nothing but a black abyss in which nothing but darkness could be seen. Alice coughed up blood, the wounds were visible all over her body, steaming, showing they were healing rapidly. Her left arm was now a bleeding stump, while half of her beautiful face was covered in a large, black burn, blinding her in that eye. Naruto, with his arms crossed, nodded appreciatively. His attack was powerful and awesome. You're a bastard, said Alice, an arm growing in a red glow on her left stump. I don't think so, my parents were married when they had me, Naruto replied with an amused smile at the clear anger in the vampire's expression. Growling in anger, the albino's wounds closed in an instant, the only evidence of which were the bloodstains on her torn dress. I guess I'll have to stop holding back, Alice said as her body was covered in red magical energy that shook the world. Sighing, from the air Naruto could only smile as he saw the mother with a threatening and dominant aura that made him lick his lips. Swoosh! Barely dodging a swipe, Naruto wore an amused smile. Alice's speed was many times greater than before. I'm going to break every bone in your body. Naruto read the albino's lips, since at the speed they were moving it wouldn't make sense to listen to her, as the sound would take a long time to reach his ears at the crazy speed at which they were moving. And I'm going to break that ass of yours. \W \\W \W \W \W. Did you seriously think of enrolling in a human school? Aino couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Rias crossed her arms and glared at him. Yeah, so what? Aino shrugged. None, except your brother will laugh at you for doing it. At this, Gremory's eyebrow twitched. That idiot can disappear for all he cares. She looked away, clearly annoyed. But Rias-sama prophesies her love for Naruto-sama, she even has a room full of pictures of him. I could swear she spends all her time, Rias covered the mouth of the girl who had spoken, her face flushed with embarrassment. Yumi, be quiet, she said with a scathing glare. Yumi raised her hands in surrender. Pervert. A monotonous voice made Rias stumble and avert her gaze to a certain albino with an emotionless expression. \W /\W 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 It should be around here. Grafia followed the trail of destruction, noticing an abyssal dark hole that seemed to stretch for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Looking up at the sky, she saw the same chasm there as well. It seemed they had even erased that. Her sensitive ears picked up what she assumed was a fight, but it was also very different. Curious, she increased her flight speed with a flap of her wings. You damn demon. Ah, you're a savage, what's going on? Lucifuge's eyebrow twitched as she guessed what was happening. Don't try to deny it, you know you love it. That voice sounded familiar to him. Noticing two figures in the distance on the ground where the abyss ended, he observed with a not very pleasant surprise a certain redhead and an albino who, judging by her features, was a vampire, in the middle of what appeared to be a fight. A fight very different from what I would have imagined. Lord Naruto, what is this supposed to mean? Grafia asked in a voice so cold it seemed to freeze the ground. Naruto shifted his gaze from the albino girl on the floor beneath him to his back, where he saw the silver-haired maid. Oh, Grafia, it's so nice to have you back, he said, wincing as Alice stood up and sank her fangs into his exposed neck, drinking his blood with an expression of utter euphoria. Grafia's gaze was so icy it seemed she could freeze everything with her mere stare. Can you explain why you're having sex with all sorts of things? You see, I angered Alice, we fought so much and one thing led to another and here we are, Naruto grunted as he felt the inner walls of Alice's cunt squeeze him as if they never wanted to let go. Alice moaned against the redhead's neck, both from the pleasure and the taste of blood that tingled her taste buds. Involuntarily, she crossed her legs to prevent him from withdrawing. This is simply unbelievable, Grafia said sarcastically, a slight twitch in her eyebrow. Annoyed and hot-headed at the sight, she clearly saw the sweat dripping from both of them, and the scent they gave off was almost suffocating. She shook her head, trying to clear her mind. Don't worry, I'll finish, in a few more hours, Naruto said before turning his attention back to Alice, grabbing her neck and pulling her away from his, much to the vampire's annoyance. She was silenced by Naruto's lips as he growled and bit Alice's lower lip hard, drawing blood. Alice moaned with pleasure and mild pain, her eyes gazing in wonder at the blood-red, demonic orbs of the Gremory. She was lost in that sea of blood for several moments. Grafia debated internally whether to freeze the duo or simply leave and let them finish, but a part of her wanted to experience the same thing the vampire was feeling, who was apparently lost in pleasure by the way her eyes were unfocused and staring off into space with a silly smile. Following his rational side, he took off and flew away so as not to do something stupid. I need a little break. No rest, you little demon. You won't leave until you finish what you started. Well, screw the break. I'm not going to stop until you can't feel your legs anymore. Kuoh. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. I need to cool down. Grafia had a small vein throbbing on her forehead. Once he was far enough away, he slowly lowered himself to the ground, only to raise an eyebrow at the sudden tremor. He knew it immediately and could only deny it. It seems this isn't far enough. Another tremor made her sigh before taking flight. End of chapter.